They thought they could humiliate her for entertainment, but in less than 60 seconds, that room would never sound the same again. The grand ballroom of the Ashford Hotel shimmered under crystal chandeliers, glasses clinking, soft jazz humming in the background as wealthy guests in tailored suits and evening gowns moved with effortless confidence. And somewhere between the polished marble floors and the quiet rhythm of luxury, Eleanor Hayes existed like a shadow, her gray uniform neat but unremarkable, her presence barely acknowledged as she moved from table to table collecting empty glasses, her eyes lowered, her steps careful, invisible by design, because in places like this, invisibility was expected of people like her. She had been working at the hotel for just over 3 weeks, long enough to understand the unspoken rules: speak only when spoken to, never interrupt, never linger, and most importantly, never draw attention, especially not in a room where attention itself was currency. At the center of the ballroom stood a pristine black grand piano, its surface reflecting the golden light above, a symbol of elegance, untouched throughout the evening as if it were more decoration than instrument, until one of the guests, a man with a loud voice and a louder laugh, noticed Eleanor pausing just a second too long near it, her fingers hovering slightly over the polished edge before she pulled them back. That was all it took. "Hey," he called out, loud enough to slice through the music. "You play." A few heads turned, curiosity flickering into amusement, and Eleanor froze for the briefest moment before offering a polite, almost apologetic smile. "Not really, sir," she said softly, but the man grinned as if he had just discovered the evening's entertainment. "Come on," he insisted, gesturing toward the piano. "Give us a show. We could use a laugh." And just like that, the energy shifted, conversation slowed, people gathered, phones subtly lifted, the kind of attention that wasn't given, but taken. Eleanor hesitated, her hands tightening slightly around the tray she held. But refusal wasn't something her position easily allowed, and someone else chimed in. "Yeah, play something simple, we won't judge," followed by quiet chuckles that carried more weight than the words themselves. The tray was taken from her without asking, placed aside like it no longer mattered. And suddenly she was no longer part of the staff, but the center of a spectacle she hadn't agreed to. Step by step, she approached the piano, each movement measured, the room watching now, waiting, expecting something small, something awkward, something forgettable. She sat down slowly, the bench cool beneath her, her reflection faintly visible in the glossy black surface. And for a moment, her hands rested in her lap, still, composed, as if time itself had paused. Somewhere in the room, someone whispered, "This is going to be good," and a ripple of quiet laughter followed. But Eleanor didn't react, her expression calm, almost distant. And then, almost imperceptibly, something changed. Her shoulders straightened, her breathing steadied, and her fingers, no longer uncertain, rose toward the keys with a precision that didn't belong to the version of her they thought they knew. And just before the first note, the room held its breath without even realizing it. The first note did not belong in that room, not the way they expected, because it was not hesitant or clumsy. It was deliberate, clean, and controlled, the kind of sound that carried intention, and for a split second, a few people smiled, assuming it was luck, a coincidence. But then came the second note, and the third, each one placed with quiet precision, forming a melody that did not ask for attention, yet commanded it anyway. And the scattered laughter began to thin, replaced by something less certain. Eleanor did not look up, her eyes fixed gently on the keys, her posture no longer that of a hesitant employee, but of someone who understood exactly where she was and what she was doing, her fingers moving with increasing confidence, not fast, not showy, just steady, as if she were telling a story only she had the right to tell. And somewhere near the back, a woman lowered her glass halfway to her lips, her brows knitting together as recognition flickered, because this was not beginner playing. This was not even intermediate. This was something practiced, something lived. The man who had called her over shifted his weight, a faint crease forming between his brows as he glanced around, searching for the laughter that had filled the room just moments before. But it was no longer there, replaced instead by a growing stillness that spread from one table to the next like a ripple no one could stop. The melody deepened. Her left hand, anchoring the rhythm while her right hand began to dance across the higher keys, light and effortless, each note connecting seamlessly to the next. And with every passing second, the space between expectation and reality stretched wider, until it became impossible to ignore. A phone that had been raised to capture something embarrassing slowly tilted downward, forgotten, as its owner leaned forward instead, eyes narrowing in disbelief. And near the piano, one of the hotel managers who had been watching from a distance straightened slightly, his expression shifting from mild concern to something closer to confusion. Eleanor's breathing remained calm, her movements economical, nothing wasted, nothing forced. And yet the sound that filled the ballroom carried a weight far beyond the simple black and white keys beneath her fingertips. It carried discipline, memory, and something deeper that could not be easily named. A man in a tailored navy suit took a step closer, almost without realizing it, drawn in by the clarity of her phrasing, the way each passage resolved with quiet confidence, not for applause, not for approval, but because it was meant to. And still, she did not acknowledge the room, not the silence, not the shifting attention, not the eyes now fixed entirely on her, because whatever this was, it was no longer about them. The piece began to evolve, the tempo subtly increasing, the dynamics expanding, and what had started as something gentle now hinted at something far more complex beneath the surface, like a calm ocean hiding a powerful current below. And the room, once filled with conversation and casual arrogance, now held only one sound, the music, and the quiet realization spreading through every corner that they had made a mistake, not a small one, but the kind that reveals more about who you are than you ever intended to show. And as Eleanor's fingers moved with effortless certainty, one undeniable truth settled over them all. They were no longer watching a joke unfold. They were witnessing something they did not yet understand. The shift was no longer subtle. It was undeniable, because the music had crossed a line that no amateur could reach, and even those who knew nothing about piano could feel it, the structure, the intention, the quiet authority behind every phrase. And as Eleanor's hands moved with fluid precision, something else began to surface, not just skill, but history, the kind that could not be learned in a few casual lessons or picked up in passing. It was built over years, shaped by discipline and sacrifice. And it revealed itself now in the smallest details, the controlled pauses, the way she let certain notes breathe just a fraction longer, the way her left hand anchored the entire piece like a steady heartbeat, while her right hand painted something far more intricate above it. A man near the front leaned in closer, his expression tightening as recognition flickered in his eyes, because he had attended concerts, real ones, in halls where tickets cost more than most people's monthly rent. And this felt familiar, uncomfortably so, like hearing something out of place in a setting that did not deserve it. Eleanor's face remained calm, but there was a quiet intensity now, her focus absolute, as if the room around her had disappeared entirely, replaced by something only she could see. And for a brief moment, a memory seemed to pass through her, not visible to anyone else, but present in the way her shoulders settled, in the way her fingers pressed into the keys with deeper conviction, as if she had been here before, not in this ballroom, but in a space where the piano was not decoration, but purpose. The tempo increased again, not rushed, but deliberate, each transition seamless, each passage unfolding with clarity that left no room for doubt. And the guests who had once stood with casual amusement now found themselves completely still, their earlier confidence dissolving into quiet disbelief, because the gap between what they expected and what they were witnessing had become impossible to ignore. The man who had started it all let out a soft breath he did not realize he was holding, his posture no longer relaxed, his earlier grin gone, replaced by something far less comfortable, something closer to realization, as if he were slowly understanding that this moment was not unfolding in his favor. Nearby, one of the hotels heard, and in that moment, the room was no longer a place of status or wealth. It was simply a space occupied by people who had misjudged someone standing right in front of them. Eleanor's fingers moved faster now, yet never lost control, every note landing exactly where it should, and the silence that surrounded her performance grew heavier, not empty, but full. charged with a realization that spread from one person to the next until it reached even those who had not been paying attention at the beginning. And as the piece approached something greater, something more powerful just beneath the surface, one truth settled over the room with quiet certainty. They were not witnessing a lucky moment or a hidden hobby. They were standing in the presence of something far more significant, something that had been underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed, and was now revealing itself in a way none of them could stop. The music no longer built towards something. It had arrived, and what filled the ballroom now was not just sound, but presence, the kind that pressed gently yet firmly against every person standing there, leaving no space for distraction, no room for doubt. And as Eleanor's hands moved with unwavering certainty, the piece unfolded into something vast and commanding, a surge of emotion layered with precision that only years of mastery could produce. Her fingers gliding across the keys with. Lowering the glass, he no longer had the presence of mind to drink from, because the realization had finally reached him. This was not his moment. It never had been. Eleanor's playing intensified, the tempo rising into a cascade of perfectly controlled motion, each note striking with clarity, each transition seamless, and yet nothing felt rushed, nothing felt forced. It was as if time itself had adjusted to match her rhythm, bending gently around the music that now defined the room. A staff member took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, unsure of what role to play anymore, because the boundaries that once separated guest and employee had dissolved entirely, replaced by something far more honest, a simple truth that needed no explanation. The melody soared, then dipped, then rose again with greater force, and in that rise, there was something unmistakable, something that spoke of stages far beyond this one, of audiences who understood what they were hearing, of moments where applause came not from surprise, but from deep appreciation, and that memory, though unspoken, seemed to live within every note she played. And then, just as the music reached its most powerful point, Eleanor slowed, not abruptly, but with intention, guiding the piece toward its conclusion with the same control she had held from the beginning, her hands easing the tempo, allowing each final note to settle into the space it had transformed, until the last sound lingered in the air, delicate yet undeniable, before fading into complete silence. No one moved, no one spoke, because the room, once filled with laughter and careless judgment, now held only a single shared realization. And as Eleanor's fingers lifted gently from the keys, the weight of that silence said more than anything they could have possibly said themselves. The silence did not break. It settled, heavy and undeniable, stretching across the ballroom like a truth no one could escape. And for a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the chandeliers above, because no one seemed willing to be the first to react, not after what they had just witnessed. Eleanor remained seated for a second longer, her hands resting lightly above the keys as if the music had not fully left her yet, her posture calm, composed, untouched by the weight of the room behind her. And then, without ceremony, she lowered her hands into her lap and stood, her movements as quiet and unassuming as when she had first approached. But now, nothing about her presence felt small. A man near the front cleared his throat softly, as if trying to reclaim control of a moment that no longer belonged to him. But the sound faded quickly, swallowed by the same silence that had taken over everything else, and one by one, the guests began to shift, not with laughter or casual conversation, but with the subtle discomfort of people who had just realized they had been wrong in a very public way. The man who had called her forward opened his mouth slightly, as if to speak, to say something that might restore his position, but no words came, because there was nothing he could say that would undo what had already been revealed, and slowly, almost instinctively, he lowered his gaze. Across the room, a woman who had been watching from the beginning brought her hand to her chest. Her expression softened, not out of pity, but out of before. Eleanor paused only briefly, not turning, not acknowledging the applause, but allowing it to exist, and then she continued walking, disappearing once again into the quiet rhythm of the hotel. But this time, invisibility was no longer something the room could pretend, because they had seen her, truly seen her, and that realization lingered far longer than any performance ever could, leaving behind a simple, Unspoken truth that echoed through the space even after she was gone. Respect is not given by status. It is revealed by character, and that night, every person in that room had learned exactly what that sounded like. The applause did not follow her out of the ballroom. It stayed behind, lingering in uneven waves as if the room itself was unsure how to recover from what had just happened. And as Eleanor stepped through the service corridor, the sound faded into something distant, something less important than the steady rhythm of her own footsteps against the narrow tiled floor, where the lights were softer, the air cooler, and the world returned to its usual quiet order. She moved with the same calm precision as before, placing the tray back onto a metal cart, adjusting its position without hesitation, as if nothing extraordinary had taken place, as if the last few minutes had not shifted the weight of an entire room. But there was a subtle difference now, not in how she carried herself, but in the silence around her, a silence that no longer came from being overlooked, but from something deeper, something settled. Behind her, the door to the ballroom opened slightly, and the hotel manager stepped into the corridor, his polished shoes out of place against the muted setting, his usual confidence replaced by a careful hesitation, as if he were stepping into unfamiliar territory. And for a moment, he simply watched her, as though trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the one he had just witnessed. "Ms. Hayes," he finally said, his voice lower than before, stripped of its usual authority. And Eleanor paused, turning just enough to acknowledge him, her expression calm, unreadable, not defensive, not proud, simply present. He took a step closer, his words measured. "I did not realize," but the sentence faltered, unfinished, because realization, once delayed, rarely finds the right words when it arrives too late. Eleanor gave a small, polite nod, not dismissive, not accepting, just enough to allow the moment to pass without tension, and the manager straightened slightly, as if regaining some of his composure. But even that felt different now, less certain, less absolute. In the distance, the faint echo of voices from the ballroom began to return, not laughter, not arrogance, but something quieter, conversations reshaped by what they had just experienced. And for the first time that evening, the space beyond those doors no longer felt entirely controlled by the people inside it. The manager hesitated once more, then said softly, "If there is anything you need," and again, the sentence trailed, because the offer itself seemed insufficient, too small for what had been revealed, and Eleanor met his gaze briefly, her eyes steady, not seeking anything, not expecting anything, and that, more than anything else, made him pause. She turned back to her work, her hands moving with the same quiet efficiency, adjusting glasses, aligning items on the cart, restoring order to a world that suddenly felt slightly out of balance. And the manager stood there for a second longer before stepping back, the distance between them no longer defined by position, but by understanding. As he returned toward the ballroom, he glanced once more over his shoulder, as if to confirm that what he had seen was real, that it had not been some fleeting illusion shaped by the atmosphere of the night. But Eleanor did not look up again. She did not follow him with her eyes, because whatever needed to be proven had already been proven, not to him, not to the guests, but in a way that existed beyond their judgment. And as the door closed behind him, separating the quiet corridor from the changed world inside, one truth remained, unspoken yet undeniable. The measure of a person is never found in where they stand, but in what they reveal when the world underestimates them. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere did not return to what it had been. It could not, because something fundamental had shifted, and no amount of conversation or carefully rehearsed laughter could restore the illusion that once filled the space. The grand piano still stood at the center, unchanged, but now it carried a different weight, no longer a symbol of elegance, but a reminder. And those who stood closest to it found themselves avoiding its a presence that remained, not loud, not demanding, but undeniable, something that had been revealed and could not be hidden again, no matter how much the room tried to return to what it had been. And back inside, as the guests slowly adjusted, as conversations cautiously rebuilt themselves, one quiet realization settled deeper into their thoughts, not spoken, not announced, but understood, that sometimes the most powerful moments are not the ones that are planned or performed for applause, but The ones that expose the truth of who we are when we believe no one is watching. The night did not end when the music stopped. It lingered, stretching into the hours that followed like an echo that refused to fade. And as guests slowly began to leave the ballroom, their movements carried a different weight, quieter, more deliberate, as if each step was shaped by something they had not expected to confront. Outside, the city lights reflected off the glass entrance of the Ashford Hotel, casting long streaks of gold and white across the polished floor, and one by one, the cars arrived, doors opened, conversations resumed, but none of them sounded quite the same, because beneath the surface of polite farewells and practiced smiles, something had shifted, something that could not be undone by simply moving on. The man who had called Eleanor forward paused near the entrance, his hand resting briefly on the door handle, as if uncertain whether to leave or to turn back, his reflection staring back at him in the glass, not as confident as before, not as certain, and for the first time that evening, he avoided his own gaze, stepping outside into the cool air without another word. Inside, the staff moved through the final stages of the evening, clearing tables, resetting spaces, restoring the room to its original state. But even in their routine, there was a subtle awareness, a quiet respect that had not been there before, and though no one spoke of it directly, the shift was understood. In the service corridor, Eleanor finished arranging the last of the trays, her hands steady, her movements unchanged, as if the night had been no different from any other. And yet, as she reached for her coat, there was a brief pause, a moment where the silence around her felt fuller, not empty, but settled, as if something long unacknowledged had finally found its place. She stepped toward the exit reserved for staff, the door opening with a soft click as the outside air met her, cooler, quieter, free from the layered expectations of the ballroom. And for a second, she stood there, neither inside nor fully outside, the threshold holding a stillness that mirrored the one she carried within. Behind her, footsteps approached, not hurried, not demanding, but intentional. And when she turned slightly, she saw the same man in the tailored navy suit who had stepped closer during her performance, his expression thoughtful, not intrusive, but respectful, as if he understood that whatever he was about to say required care. "Excuse me," he began, his voice measured. "I just wanted to say, that was extraordinary." And the words, simple as they were, carried no performance, no expectation, only recognition. Eleanor met his gaze briefly, her eyes steady, and gave a small nod, not dismissing the compliment, but not holding on to it either, as if she had learned long ago that validation from others was never the point. The man hesitated, then added, "You should not be hidden in a place like this." But the statement lingered between them without resolution, because it assumed something that did not fully understand her choice, and Eleanor's expression softened just slightly, not in disagreement, but in quiet clarity, as if to say that where she stood had never defined who she was. She stepped past him without another word, moving into the night with the same calm presence she had carried all evening, leaving behind a space that felt altered in her absence. And as the door closed gently behind her, the man remained there for a moment, watching the place where she had stood, realizing that some people do not need recognition to prove their worth. They simply reveal it when the moment calls, and then continue on, unchanged by the opinions of those who were never meant to define them. The city did not notice her leaving. It never did, because people like Eleanor Hayes were not the kind the world paused for, not the kind that drew headlines or gathered attention. And yet, as she walked down the quiet sidewalk beneath the soft glow of streetlights, there was a stillness around her that felt complete, not empty, but whole, as if nothing had been taken from her and nothing needed.